You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Welcome back to Engage, where John and I engage with you and engage with your comments here on Mission Log Engage.
We, we, en- we engage our minds. Some
We
would just run off
engage
at the mouth.
everything.
Everything. By the way, I like you did that because you had this nebula behind you, and that was really that was a very powerful thing you just did. So
That's the new GIF. Somebody GIF me.
that's good. Excellent. So this is the show where we get to answer your comments and emails and questions and all that good stuff. And we have one today from Ian, an email, and there's something in this that really speaks to you, Norman. So I had to pick this, and you'll answer it. I'll just follow along. So
Okay.
here we go. Ian says, "Hey guys, I am a longtime listener. I'm a TOS and TNG fan, and am on the right. Am the right age to consider both my trek. Now that you're moving on to DS9, I find that my thoughts and memories of this, not to mention all of the subsequent series, are complicated and hard to work out. The source of my mixed thoughts is a show that overlapped with TNG and DS9, Babylon 5. Both about an orbiting space station surrounded by mythic events. I think at some point it might be interesting to compare these two. I have to say that I initially really liked DS9. I thought it was funny and a very interesting departure from TNG. Over time, as the story got more into long narrative arcs and more war-oriented, to my memory, I began to lose interest. Oddly, Babylon 5, which I initially thought was cheesy, I grew to like more, for the exact same reason. It grew more mythic and with longer arcs and more warlike. I cannot reconcile why I accepted the one and not the other. Maybe it just began to feel less like Star Trek. As a side note, there's a Babylon 5 episode and a TNG episode that is very similar, and I would be interested in your thoughts about it. It's the TNG episode Chain of Command Part 2 and the Babylon 5 episode Intersections in Real Time. Thoughts? Love the show, and thanks, Ian." Well, thank you, Ian. Of course, here I have to turn to our resident Babylon 5 expert, Norman Lau, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Champion.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
What do you think about this? What do you think about Ian's take?
I was there when like a lot of the Deep Space Nine versus Babylon 5 kind of like vitriol hit like the burgeoning like alt Usenet groups, on AOL servers and things like that, when the internet was just in its infancy. I understand where Ian is coming from because I heard a lot of what Ian is saying from other people. They don't understand why there was this really serious schism in science fiction fandom between Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5. And over the course of the years, I think I really know why. And it's because Deep Space Nine, I think for TOS and TNG fans, it started to deviate from the Roddenberry vision of the utopian future as we started getting into these darker, more complex warlike stories. Babylon 5 started out that way. It started off with a humanity that isn't perfect, that a humanity that hasn't reached a certain utopian society, that they're still rolling up their shirt sleeves and getting dirty and, just trying to do the best they can to try and avoid any more conflict with any more alien races. They're not perfect. They don't try to be perfect. They don't have all the answers, and they don't try to have all the answers. They have characters that are deeply flawed. They have characters that are, in some cases, criminal. They're criminal characters that, and you start to empathize with certain character motivations. It's easier to do that from a show that establishes that from the very beginning than it is to try and understand why these characters act that way from a brand that know delivers something differently. That's the difference between Babylon 5 and Star Trek, Deep Space Nine. It's Star Trek, Deep Space Nine. So people want to see Star Trek in the space station.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if they delivered that in the opinion of some fans. So that's where I think, and also in that era of science fiction, you had TNG and DS9 ruling the airwaves, and you had this little bitty upstart show called Babylon 5 starting to take a chunk out of fan attention at the time. And Star Trek is like, how dare you? Like, who do you think you are, little engine that could? And that little engine of could ended up becoming, one of the most influential science fiction series of all time in popular opinion.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, look, there is something about just the way that Hollywood works. Like, if you have a good idea, there's a very good chance that somebody else had that good idea because it's a good idea. So, the idea of putting something on a space station and telling long story arcs or whatever, yeah, I mean, this is probably something that kicked around quite a bit. And definitely, I love the idea of pushing the Star Trek narrative a bit, doing something that isn't necessarily quote unquote traditional Star Trek. Um, that said, the difficulty with any sequel or spinoff, and especially with Star Trek, is that it comes with all this baggage.
mhm.
It has to be the same but different. And how much of the same are you going to take from column A, and how much of different are you going to take from column B? And Star Trek fans, by the time that DS9 was on, they had 30 years of, 25 years, going on 30 years of other content that had already stuck in their heads. So that task is going to be really difficult to be different enough. And I love the premise. I love the idea of like, no, let's go far away, and they don't have all the trappings of Starfleet around them all the time. What do you do then? Question then becomes, okay, are they telling stories though that feel like Star Trek stories? And that's where we get
Right.
into the weeds, and that's where we get all this very interesting feedback in all of our other
Hmm.
email about how we approach DS9 and what our expectations are, which can certainly be very different. Um, I've not watched any of Babylon 5, but I love the premise, and I love the idea that at the same time you had these two shows that seemingly have a lot of the same DNA. That's
Hmm.
all right though. They both then get to find their niche, and they're both successful shows in their own way. So,
Yeah,
you know.
it's interesting that the camps, they started to kind of like put up the silos when, there was always the Star Wars versus Star Trek camps. Those silos went up, and now within, another science fiction fandom, you had the Star Trek camp versus like the Babylon 5 camp. Those silos
Yeah.
started going up, which was really unfortunate because they do share certain similarities. There is proof positive documentation in Joe Michael Straczynski's autobiography called Becoming Superman of how he pitched to Paramount, and then they sat on it, and then he
Hmm.
pitched to Warner P10, and then they acted on it, and then in 1991 his pilot came out. In 1992 Deep Space Nine came out. So
Yeah.
there is a correlation of the time frame that, yeah, it can add to the controversy, but in the
Sure.
end, who cares? They're both great shows,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Well, and that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, if they're good ideas, they're going to come out. And if you're a fan, if you're a science fiction fan, or more is better because that
mhm,
means that there's room in the marketplace for it to exist.
right.
That's great. It was a very different thing in 1969 when Star Trek's going off the air, and there just isn't anything else to fill that need. And now we kind of you know, looking at when we're recording this in 2021, now we have the luxury of all this like narrow casting
Mm,
essentially, where a hit TV show can be a hit because you've got a million viewers instead of 16 million that you needed 20, 30 years ago.
right.
So, yeah, I think that's all good. I certainly understand the controversy though,
Sure.
because
And
yeah.
yeah, and I just wanted to really quickly answer because we're running out of time here
Hmm.
about these two episodes. So, Chain of
Oh yeah.
Command Part Two. That's There Are Four Lights.
Yep.
It
Yep.
was Picard's torturing by Gulma Dread, the
Hmm.
great David Warner,
Oh
and
hell yeah.
then in Intersections in Real Time, it was a very similar episode where they took the leader of the Earth Alliance, or the renegade Captain John Sheridan, and his own government tortured him to break him to sign basically a contract saying like everything is my fault. But uh,
Mm-hmm.
what's great about both of these episodes is you have two pairs of actors sitting in a room acting to the point of perfection. You just
Yeah.
want, you're so just involved with every single nuanced line, every single twitch, like in their eye, every single motivation behind, the inflection of their voice. it's so good. It's such a pleasure. It's a joy, a privilege to watch acting that good in both of those
I
episodes.
love it. That's magic right there.
Mhm.
All right, Ian, thank you so much. I'm glad we got to talk about that today. And again, any of you who want to send in a question or a comment, missionlog@roddenberry.com, Facebook and Twitter, Mission Log Pod, and go subscribe. Go find us on YouTube under the Roddenberry Prod channel. There we are on the playlist for Mission Log Engage. And remember, we may use your comments and engage with them on the air.